Despite every precaution taken to ensure that all 21 Nazi defendants survived the entire Nuremberg trial and faced international justice for their crimes against humanity, one of them still managed to take his own life. Hermann Göring was not only the second most powerful figure in the Third Reich, he was also one of the most dangerous men of World War II. As Adolf Hitler's ruthless enforcer, he played a critical role in Hitler's rise, helping secure the chancellorship in 1933 and establishing the feared Gestapo, the secret police that crushed dissent and helped facilitate the Holocaust by rounding up Jewish people. Hitler rewarded him with the unique title of Reichsmarschall, placing him in command of all German armed forces and naming him as his official successor. But behind this brutal authority, Göring battled a chaotic private life driven by a long-standing morphine addiction. You can imagine what it meant for history and for humanity to bring a man like this to trial for his political and military crimes. But this man had a very different ending in mind. What kind of man was Hermann Göring really? Where exactly was he hiding when the Allies captured him? And why wasn't he anywhere near Hitler at the moment of the Führer's suicide? How did he manage to sneak a cyanide capsule into one of the most heavily monitored prison environments in history? And how accurate is the film Nuremberg when it comes to portraying the highest-ranking Nazi official on trial? Today, we're breaking down the final chapter of Göring's life and the last trick he pulled right under the court's nose. If you enjoy deep-dive historical stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and smash that like button, and let's get it started. Before we get to Göring's trial and suicide, we need to understand who he was. Hermann Göring wasn't just another Nazi official. He was the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany for most of Hitler's dictatorship. Only Hitler himself outranked him. Hermann Göring was born in Bavaria in 1893 and began his career in the military, receiving his commission in 1912. He served as a pilot during World War I and became commander of a distinguished squadron. He joined the then-small Nazi Party around 1922, and thanks to his status as a decorated war veteran and former officer, was quickly given command of the party's stormtroopers, SA. He participated in the failed 1923 beer hall putsch and was seriously wounded, reportedly in the groin. The wound left long-term consequences. After being treated with morphine, he developed a drug addiction, which would haunt him for years thereafter. By 1928, Göring was elected to the Reichstag, the German parliament, and in 1932 he became president of the Reichstag. After Hitler became chancellor in 1933, Göring's power exploded. Hitler and the Nazi leadership counted on him to Nazify Prussia, Germany's largest state, by transforming the Prussian police into a tool for the new regime. That included establishing the secret political police, the Gestapo, which played a central role in repressing political opponents. He also had a major hand in setting up the first concentration camps aimed at corrective treatment of political opponents. As Germany remilitarized, Göring was placed in charge of aviation and thus became commander-in-chief of the newly revived German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. Germany's dramatic early war successes. In 1940, Hitler awarded him the specially created rank of Reichsmarschall, the highest military rank in the Reich, putting him nominally above all field marshals and highlighting Hitler's trust in him as the designated successor. According to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Hitler viewed him as a figure who could help make the Nazis look respectable, giving the regime a veneer of legitimacy. Göring was notorious even among the Nazi elite for his ostentation, self-indulgence, and greed. He amassed enormous wealth, including vast looted art collections, and lived in grand estates. According to descriptions in sources, his large body, or colossal girth, was partly the result of a glandular defect, but also worsened by his heavy use of narcotic pain relievers, paracodeine, morphine derivatives. That drug dependence contributed to mood swings. Alternately, he was elated and charismatic, or depressed and erratic. He indulged in flamboyant uniforms, decorations, jewelry, liked to impress, to show off his rank and prestige. Despite this seemingly unshakable trust, there were tensions under the surface. Other top Nazi leaders, especially those in the military and SS, resented Göring's favored position, his self-indulgence, and the wealth he amassed. Göring's personal traits, showiness, addiction, grandiosity, likely caused mistrust and envy among peers. Ultimately, by the very end of the war, this fragile trust collapsed. Göring was nowhere near Hitler's final days in the bunker. In April 1945, as the Third Reich disintegrated, Göring sent a telegram to Hitler, the so-called Goring telegram, offering to assume leadership of Germany, an act that infuriated Hitler. Hitler responded by stripping Göring of all power and naming new successors. Göring had retreated to southern Bavaria, believing arrogantly that he might even negotiate with the Allies to become the next leader of Germany. On May 6, 1945, he was captured by U.S. troops near the town of Fischhorn, Austria. He didn't resist. He didn't run. In fact, he approached the Americans with a full entourage and luggage like a man checking into a hotel, not a defeated war criminal. To the shock of the soldiers who arrested him, Göring arrived wearing medals and carrying morphine tablets, almost as if he still believed he would be treated as a political figure, not a prisoner. Once at Nuremberg, Göring became the prime focus of the American prison psychiatrist, Dr. Douglas Kelley. Kelley was determined to understand what made high-ranking Nazis tick. Göring became his most fascinating subject. Kelley later said Göring had an extraordinary ability to manipulate people, an inflated sense of destiny, and a performer's instinct for reading a room and playing an audience. Kelley concluded that Göring wasn't insane. He was a master manipulator, skilled at reframing guilt as duty and atrocity as necessity. When the Nuremberg Trials began, Göring quickly positioned himself as the unofficial leader of the defendants. His speeches were powerful, provocative, and, at times, disturbingly persuasive. At one point he declared, "The victor will always be the judge and the vanquished the accused." This sentence shook the courtroom and infuriated the prosecution. Göring wasn't just defending himself. He was trying to delegitimize the entire idea of the trial. He dominated cross-examinations. He mocked witnesses. He played to the cameras and reporters. For a time, he even began to win sympathy from some observers, something that terrified the prosecutors. Eventually, the judges curtailed his ability to grandstand, and his influence weakened. But even at his lowest point, he remained defiant. We covered Göring's relationship with Dr. Douglas Kelley and his role at the Nuremberg trial in our previous video. You can find the link to it in the description. In this video, we'll focus on the main question: how did Göring manage to take his own life in a cell under constant surveillance? On October 13, 1946, Colonel Burton Andrews informed the Nazi defendants in Nuremberg that all of their appeals had been denied. 2 days later, on October 15, the world was shaken by a shocking announcement. Göring, sentenced to hang, was found dead in his cell. He had taken his own life, avoiding, as many newspapers wrote, the disgrace of the rope and leaving the world on his own terms. The conditions inside the Nuremberg prison were exceptionally strict. The building dated back to 1868, and the once powerful leaders of the Third Reich were crammed into small, austere cells, just 2 by 4 meters. Guards rotated every 2 hours and were required to glance through the door peephole constantly. At night, a bright lamp shone directly on the prisoner's bed, and they were forbidden from facing the wall. After the suicide of Robert Ley, head of the German Labor Front, the prison security was intensified fourfold. Yet none of this prevented the Nazi number 2 from biting into a cyanide capsule in the final hours of his life. Former bodyguard of Soviet prosecutor R.A. Rudenko Iosif Hoffman later recalled, "All Nazi leaders during the last days of the war carried standard capsules of potassium cyanide. Göring also had a poison capsule. When he was brought to the interrogation center, he was searched thoroughly, and a brass shell case containing the capsule was found. When it was taken from him, Goring became very worried, and the Americans decided he had no more poison. At Nuremberg, the defendants were searched daily, but no poison was ever found. So, the night of October 15th, what happened? Mark Rajinsky, a participant in the Nuremberg Trials, wrote in his book, Nuremberg, Before the Judgment of History. On the evening of October 15th, Colonel Andrews, who supervised the prison security, visited each of the condemned and informed them that the Control Council had rejected their appeals for clemency. At exactly midnight, he ran into the press room and said in confusion, "Goring is dead." After calming down, Andrews said that the guard on duty heard a strange choking sound from Goring's cell. He immediately called the officer and the doctor. When they entered, Goring was in his death throes. The doctor found small pieces of glass in his mouth and determined the cause of death, cyanide poisoning. Goring remained the only defendant who openly battled the tribunal, never wavering in his ideology, never expressing remorse. With Hitler dead, many noted that Goring essentially assumed the symbolic status of Nazi number one. When his sentence was delivered at 1450, the judges told him, "The International Military Tribunal sentences you to death by hanging." And then added, "The guilt of this man is unprecedented, and his crimes are so monstrous that no justification is possible." On the eve of his execution, Goring requested absolution from the prison chaplain, Pastor Göring. But Göring refused. He had never shown any remorse. "I would not participate in a performance staged by someone who believes in nothing." The exact date and time of the executions were kept secret from everyone, including the condemned. Yet clearly, someone had spoken too much. So, execution was scheduled, 2 a.m. October 16th, 1946. And on October 15th, Colonel Andrews informed all prisoners that their appeals were rejected. Throughout the evening, guards reported Goring lying strictly on his back, hands atop the blanket, exactly as regulations required. Lieutenants entered the cell for inspection and reported that nothing forbidden had been found. At 22:30, Private Harold Johnson of the 26th Infantry Regiment began his shift. He had no idea he would guard Goring for only 16 more minutes. In Johnson's testimony, "When I came on duty at 22:30, Goring was lying on his bunk on his back, hands at his sides on top of the blanket. He remained motionless for 5 minutes. Then he raised one hand, as if shielding his eyes from the light, and put it back. Around 22:40, he folded his hands on his chest, fingers interlaced, and turned his head toward the wall. He stayed like that for 2 or 3 minutes. Then he stretched his arms back along his sides. It was exactly 22:44. I looked at my watch. 2 or 3 minutes later, he seemed to stiffen, and a muffled gasp escaped his lips. Johnson immediately called the sergeant. I told him something was wrong with Goring. He ran to the administration office. Seconds later, he returned with Lieutenant Kramer and Chaplain Göring. Kramer looked into the cell. I unlocked the door. They went inside and I followed, shining my flashlight. Goring's right arm hung off the bed. Pastor Göring lifted it, checked the pulse, and whispered, "Good Lord, this man is dead." On Goring's table lay an envelope addressed to Colonel Andrews. Inside were a farewell letter to his wife Emmy, a statement addressed to the German people, and a personal note to Andrews explaining how he smuggled cyanide. This letter has never been published. The note to the warden read, Nuremberg, October 11th, 1946. To the Commandant. I always had the poison capsule with me from the moment of my arrest. When I was brought to Mondorf, I had 3 capsules. I left the first one in my clothes so it would be found during the search. The second I placed under the hanger when undressing and took it back when dressing again. I did this both in Mondorf and here in my cell so skillfully that, despite the frequent and thorough searches, it was never discovered. During the court sessions I hid it in my boots. The third capsule is still in my suitcase, hidden in a round jar of skin cream. I could have taken it twice in Mondorf had it become necessary. The guards are not to blame for this. It was practically impossible to find the capsule. That is how things turned out. Hermann Göring. Whether this confession was truthful remains unknown. Over the years, new stories emerged. One suggested that Goring obtained cyanide through Lieutenant Jack Willis, who allegedly let him into the supply room, receiving Goring's watch in exchange. But the most sensational came in 2005, when 78-year-old former guard Herbert Lee Stivers from California revealed his version. He claimed he had been approached by a flirtatious German girl named Mona, who convinced him that Goring was gravely ill and denied medicine. She handed Stivers a pen supposedly containing medication and asked him to deliver it to Goring. Stivers said, "I didn't think of his suicide when I took the pen to Goring. He never seemed confused or like someone who would kill himself. Had I known the truth, I would never have brought him anything that could help him escape the gallows." For 59 years, he stayed silent, fearing a military court. Only his daughter persuaded him. "Dad, you're part of history. You must tell your story before you die." And so, in 2005, he finally did. The 2025 film Nuremberg puts Hermann Göring front and center. But how close is Russell Crowe's portrayal to the real man who dominated the courtroom in 1946? Let's break down what the movie gets right and where it bends history for dramatic effect. Göring's charisma and manipulative brilliance. Critics and historians agree that Crowe accurately captures what made Goring so dangerous at the real trial: his confidence, his sharp mind, and his ability to twist every situation to his advantage. He was not a raving monster. He was articulate, charming, and disturbingly persuasive. This matches historical accounts perfectly. His refusal to show guilt or shame. Just like in the film, Goring never admitted wrongdoing. He treated the courtroom as a stage and the judges as opponents to be outplayed. The presence of U.S. Army psychiatrist Dr. Douglas Kelley. The film correctly shows that the defendants, including Goring, were evaluated by psychiatrist Douglas Kelley before the trial began. Kelley's job wasn't to counsel them, but to determine whether they were mentally fit to stand trial. Goring's public persona versus private instability. Crowe's portrayal hints at a complicated inner life, which is historically accurate. Goring was a heavy morphine addict and hid his dependency behind his polished public image. Overall, the movie captures the dual nature of Goring, outwardly composed and intelligent, but inwardly unstable, a combination that made him terrifyingly effective. Where the film takes artistic license. The psychological duel between Kelley and Goring is dramatized. Some critics point out that the movie romanticizes their relationship, turning their interviews into something like a moral chess match. In real life, Kelley wasn't nearly as conflicted or emotionally entangled as the film suggests. Reviewers even describe Crowe's performance as vocal, intense, and almost Shakespearean, emphasizing drama over strict realism. The movie simplifies the broader courtroom dynamics. While Crowe dominates the narrative, the real Nuremberg trials involved dozens of defendants, hundreds of witnesses, and teams of prosecutors from 4 allied nations. The film largely sidelines the Soviet delegation, the French and British prosecutors, and most of the political context. For storytelling purposes, it becomes the Goring show, which, while partly true historically, leaves out huge parts of the real picture. Some dialogue is clearly stylized. Critics mention that certain lines feel like they were written to be memorable quotes, rather than historically documented statements. Goring's physical condition is softened. Years of drug abuse had severely damaged him. Crowe's version is more cinematic than medically accurate. So, how accurate is Russell Crowe's Goring? Surprisingly accurate. Crowe nails the charisma, the arrogance, the intelligence, and the manipulative charm that shocked spectators at the real trial. As a historical documentary? No. The film trims political complexity, condenses characters, and heightens the drama to make Goring the centerpiece of the story, sometimes at the expense of truth. But overall, it succeeds in one important way. It shows the world that the most terrifying criminals in history aren't always the loudest or the most monstrous-looking. Sometimes they're the ones who speak calmly, smile confidently, and try to talk their way out of justice. What do you think? Did Goring's final act of taking cyanide make him look clever, or just desperate and pathetic? Did he manage to prove anything to justice with this final act, or was it nothing more than simple cowardice and an inability to face the inevitable? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And also, which historical film should we break down next? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Stay safe and take care.